Hey guys, Steve Moran here with an episode of Workforce Wednesday. I am talking to Matt Strange with ProcareHr. We are going to be talking about labor productivity. Labor is consistently the single most expensive thing in senior living. It's the most important thing. It makes or breaks. Before we get started on our conversation, this. Matt, welcome. Let's start with having you introduce yourself. Tell me who you are, what you do.
Sure. Hi, Matt Strange. I am the Chief Operating Officer at ProcareHr. ProCare is a comprehensive HR company based out of Minneapolis. We only do senior living. We do all things HR from talent acquisition to the normal payroll, benefits, all those sorts of things, including labor management, which we're going to talk about today.
Terrific. So, as I teased with our introduction, labor is this massive expense, 60-70% of the total expense stack for most senior living companies. And it's not just the cost, it's also recruitment and keeping people happy and all of those things. And so a big part of that is you want to have people work really effectively, right? And you want to get maximum utilization, but you don't want to work them so hard that they burn out and they hate their job, right? So how do you maximize this and actually make people love it?
Sure. I think the first thing is you have to do it on purpose. So it's with intention that you make sure you get, I like to say, the right people in the right spots for the right amount of time at the right amount of money. Sounds easy. It's really hard. But the biggest way, we do that is we leverage a combination of technology, but also the facts. So, there's what you think you want to do and what you're budgeted to do, but then there's also what you're actually doing. And I think the secret is marrying those two things together and making sure when you have those employees that are working crazy amounts of hours, you understand why, but you also understand how can you get more people to be able to fill in some of those gaps to meet your bottom line goals, but also recognize that employee picking up the shift might have a means to an end they're trying to reach as well, which by taking those hours away, you're, taking a loyal employee and potentially making them look for work elsewhere.
Terrific. So one of the things I think that everybody struggles with, every boss or every leader struggles with is figuring out the right workload for your team. So this is going to be really hard since I've got Jada behind the scenes, right? I'm going to pick on my own organization for a minute. Now, most senior living organizations don't have remote workers, so I'm a little bit different than that, right? But one of the things that as a leader of an organization that's all remote is I have really no way to tell whether or not I'm asking people to do too much or whether they have additional capacity. But I think that's even true in a senior living community. I mean, how do I really know whether I need to assign 3 residents, 5 residents, 10 residents? I mean, we know that 100 or probably 50 is too many, right? But how do we figure this out?
Yeah, I think there's always the best practice rules you can have by you can take your levels of care or your points or whatever the mechanism is that you determine to create that care plan, and you can, factor in how many minutes it takes, and there's the spreadsheet and all that stuff that goes with it. But the truth is that, the human aspect of what we do means that the things can take longer or shorter, but most of the time longer than what they're budgeted to. And so, we really think that the important thing is creating that feedback loop where you're constantly talking to employees about how's it going? How are you feeling? Are you feeling extra stress? Is this taking longer than it should? Are there interventions we should be taking or tools that we should be adding to help you do your job better? But I think a lot of times we wait to ask for feedback until people are at their breaking point. And then, they've gone past the point of return at that point. And so it's really important to create intentional touch points with your night shift, with your weekend people, the people you don't see every day that might as well be remote because they're not there when you're there. And find out, how are they doing? What's going on with them personally, professionally? How are the residents? How's their workload? All those things.
So can you talk to me a little bit more about how you actually gather that feedback? I think there's a tendency, I pick up the phone or I jump on a Zoom call with my team members and I go, "Hey, how are things going?" They think they're going to answer the way they think I want to hear it, right? So they're going to say, "Oh, things are pretty good," or unless it's really, really bad, and then they'll explode at me. So how do I do this in a way that's really effective?
I think there's not one way. Everybody receives gratitude differently. And I think part of it is knowing your team and what resonates with them. Like, some people they're not willing to share that information, because if I tell you I don't know how to do something or I need something, that's them saying, I'm failing. So I think it's really about making sure that you're empowering all different levels of the organization to receive feedback, but do something with it. And also, not just sending a survey out 3 times a year and saying, fill this out, how are we doing? I think that's important. It provides benchmarks. But what it doesn't do is give you that real time, in the heat of the moment, how are they feeling? Because that's the raw, true emotion. And then you can actually do something with it to improve that individual employee or a department's performance.
Yeah, because the flip side of this, right, is that if I'm a leader and I don't know there's a problem, I can't fix the problem.
Absolutely.
And so I always worry that on the flip side is that, that somebody is really struggling with something. Either they don't have enough time, they don't have enough energy, they don't know how to do something. They just think it's a dumb idea. If they don't tell me that, then I can't make it better. And so that becomes creating an environment where it works both ways is super important.
Absolutely. No, I agree entirely. And I think, making sure those employees have the basic things that are basic but aren't basic at the same time, like a predictable work schedule, an understanding of, how does that work for them as their life changes, as they might have children that go to school, if they're on a break or it's summer or things going on. Just leaving space for people to be human is something that I think sometimes we forget, which seems counterintuitive to senior living, but we're humans caring for humans, and we don't always leave space for that because it doesn't fit on our spreadsheet or on our pro forma or whatever the thing is. But it's arguably the difference between the best place to work and just a place to work.
So I love this. One of the things that we talk about at Foresight is our goal is to improve the lives of people who live and work in senior living. Mm-hmm. And fundamentally, we believe it's possible to create work environments where people love coming to work every day. That doesn't mean people won't have a bad day, the boss won't have a bad day, but in general, that people actually really love their jobs. And part of what drives this is the Gallup, of course, as you know, has done some research. And one of the things that they have discovered is that when people quit their jobs, they're actually rarely quitting their jobs. They're almost always quitting their direct manager. Mm-hmm. And so I've been thinking a lot, and this just came up in the last couple of days. I was thinking about this, and I made some notes, and not all the way there, but I think this is a great opportunity to talk about this, is how do you become that boss that people stay loyal to rather than being the boss that people want to quit?
Sure. I think a lot of it is, making sure that if you're in a leadership role in senior living, like, you're serving a number of different people, and you're also serving the other leaders as well. And I think that one of the things that you have to look at is what does the data suggest? If people are leaving, where are they leaving? Why are they leaving? What are they? And are there trends to that? Like, one of the things we just found in a client was they had 130% turnover of their direct care staff. And when we aggregated it, about 80% of that was concentrated to one shift, one unit, and happened to be 3 coworkers that were in that unit that had been together a long time. They had a deal. They figured out how they worked, and whoever the new person was that came in, they said, "This is your hazing period. You're going to do the work. And then when you earn your stripes, you can come in and work with the rest of us here. But knowing that kind of data is really, really important. And I think as a manager, you have to, if you don't have a mechanism to track that, you've got to inspect. You got to step in and inspect with people and see, what's the onboarding like? What's the orientation like? Do people feel comfortable and safe to do the work that they're doing? And safety and, I would say safety and trust from an employee to their manager of, I can be honest with you. I can verbal process things. I can think through things with you. If I'm having a challenge, you're here with me versus I only come to you if I can't figure it out myself. I think those kind of cultures fundamentally change a community, and it starts one level and it works its way around and it becomes the culture.
Terrific. This is really good. I want to back up to this example you used, and then we're going to put that comment back up on the screen in a minute. Not yet. So you've got you diagnosed this turnover problem where you have this cabal of people who were mean boys, mean girls, essentially, to the newbies. Right? How do you fix that?
It feels easy, and there's two ways to do it. Like some people would say, you've got to scorch the earth and you've got to break the band up and do something different. But I think it's really important to understand the why. And sometimes it's as simple as, when I was in the operations chair, it's getting with that employee that is causing the problems and helping them understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. And they tend to say things like, well, nobody wants to work anymore. The reality of it is maybe nobody wants to work the way you're working or the style that you're working, but you were new here once too. And who gave you a break and who helped you and what did that feel like? And how can you be that for someone else? And I think recognition goes a long way with that longevity employee, but also letting them understand that you have an ability to train and drive the future of the industry. So even though you've been here 15 years, we value you, you're great. We need more people to take care of more people. And, we trust you to mentor this person, work with this person. You're great at what you do and reinforcing that versus coming in with a hammer. But I also think you have to set expectations that say, this is how we treat each other. This is how we don't treat each other. And this is what it means to be a coworker here.
Yeah, and I think part of the thing I struggle with, and you sort of talked about peers, right? But sometimes the bosses are the problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we have to be honest about that they don't treat people very well.
Absolutely. Yeah, we once worked with someone who said, we don't give anyone a name badge until they're here 30 days because they're too expensive and they don't stay. And so, I jokingly say they had the printed one that looks like you're speed dating at a restaurant that they had to wear for the first 30 days, which nothing makes you feel less like a part of a team than not even having a real name badge. And, they'd say, well, if you make it here 30 days, you'll be here for a lifetime. But that feels like it's going to be a terrible sentence versus a wonderful, journey in your first 30 days.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw this great, I came across this great idea. I can't remember where it was, but they suggested that when you have a new hire, and I would think this would work even for frontline employees, that you ask them to do a little slideshow about their life. And they can do, whatever they want. We actually did this with my team after Christmas. I asked everybody to put together a little slideshow of what they did over Christmas. And it was really fun. And we just got to know each other. And I thought, man, what a great thing to do. You could even backfill with people who've been there for a while. Mm-hmm. So I actually want to come back to this comment. If you can put that up for us, Jada. It's also important that direct managers have to make the necessary changes. What are your thoughts on this?
I wholeheartedly agree. I think that oftentimes we create this Wizard of Oz mentality where if you want to talk to this person, we've got to talk to the wizard. We've got to go up and see if this person approves what's going on. Accountability in a good culture can be done by anyone at any level. And I think when you create a culture of accountability, it gets rid of that whole gotcha mentality where you feel like you have to write someone up. You feel like, giving feedback needs to have a witness and all these things. And granted, there are times and places you have to follow protocol, but generally speaking, I think a manager has to have the empowerment and authority to be able to make decisions with what needs to happen within their purview, and understanding that the good, the bad, the otherwise, what are the rules? How do we celebrate success? Which I think we oftentimes make, well, how do we prevent failure? But we don't talk about how do we celebrate success. But having those two things and the ability to drive those, fundamentally changes an organization. I agree.
So I love this. So from two different data points in the last, say, 2 months, I have been exposed. So there's this old belief that has been around as long as I've been sort of looking at cultures and organization that says that you praise in public and criticize in private, right? And then from two completely different sources in the last month or so, I have seen two different leadership, very public, where they say you've got to be doing your criticism in public. And the idea and one is from NVIDIA, the CEO of NVIDIA, and his position is that if somebody has done something that's not working well and I criticize them in private, he's the only person or she's the only person who learns from that. But if I do it in a more public space, then it becomes a learning experience for everybody else. And then there's a guy by the name of Keith Ferrazzi who wrote the bestseller Never Eat Alone. He's got a new book out called Never Lead Alone. And he basically says the same thing, that when there are problems that you need great candor. Of course, Kim Scott with her radical candor sort of addresses not so much the public private, but really. So what do you think? How do you deal with those things in a way that helps the organization and doesn't crush people?
Yeah, I think it has to be cultural versus transactional. I think that's the most important thing, where like if you're only recognizing people if you're giving them a compliment or a criticism, like you're missing all the stuff that happens in between. But if it becomes part of every day, then it becomes safe. And I use the word safe a lot because I think it allows us to be vulnerable. And when people are vulnerable, they'll say, instead of making a mistake because they don't want to ask and look like they don't know what they're doing, they'll say, I don't know how to do this, or is this right? Or could you check this for me? And if you do that, I really do think the criticism piece, it doesn't go away entirely, but it becomes less of a result versus a part of the journey that you're working on together. But I think, it really is a moment where if you celebrate together, you win together, you fail together, you pick each other up off the ground, it becomes less controversial, but it can be tough. I think there's some things need to be done in private. If there's something personal going on I think you have to know the audience and you have to know the person. And that's part of, I think one of the most underestimated part of being a leader is you need to know your employees. You need to know your team and how they work. And there's certain people that I know that I've worked with that if you said something in public, they'll shut down and they're going to be done for the next week because they're just defeated. And it's that like wounded inner child that comes back out to play every once in a while with them. But other people, they like it. I agree. Like if you can use this as a teaching moment, then it doesn't mean you're bad. It means what happened isn't great.
Yeah, but I think that that's really wise. This idea that you've got to know your people well enough to know what works for them and what doesn't. And I would add that can you have maybe the other part of it we need to talk about for a minute is, can you have somebody who is too sensitive? What do you think?
Define that. I think everybody. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, so I think there are some people who basically just don't take criticism at all, that they react so badly to it that perhaps in that situation we have to that becomes its own set of problems.
Sure. And I think a lot of it is you have to have a conversation about the why. If people understand the why behind something, it really like diffuses a lot of items. So if you say to someone, hey, when this happens, this causes this result, and that's why we're having this conversation, versus don't do this anymore. And I know that feels, simplistic, but if somebody understands why what they're doing is not okay, not because you're the sheriff and you're going to write them a ticket, because if you do this, this is what could happen. I think people start to feel a little better about it, but it's okay. I've had to say to people, like, I need you to be open to receiving feedback and not feeling defensive. I'm not saying you're bad. I'm not saying you are not good. I'm only saying we need to work on these things.
Yeah, and ultimately, this is actually hopeful. It'll make your life better as well as the organization's life better. So,
Absolutely.
earlier we had a question about dementia and staffing. Do you see it differently in how you interact with team members there and how you create culture there?
Yeah, I think the most important thing when dealing with people with dementia is making sure that your team is trained and equipped to understand dementia, to understand the journey and the process and agitation, all of the different types of dementia. And what that looks like and appears like, so that they can know what they're dealing with when they're dealing with a resident and their behavior, or maybe not a behavior, maybe it's a communication method that appears as a behavior. And I think getting teams to understand those, like those pieces, it feels like, well, it's really complicated to understand. It really isn't. And there's so many wonderful free resources out there that you can put as part of your orientation that give your team the tools to do their job better. So when they're trying to do a shower, or they're trying to help someone up out of bed, or someone said to me once when I was learning about the when someone walks into the room in the middle of the night, if you have dementia and you don't remember where you are, what would you do in the middle of the night if somebody walked into your bedroom? You'd yell and you'd get scared because this could be a burglar. But instead, if you knock on the door and say, "Hey, it's Matt. Good morning. I'm here to do this," you're going to, all of a sudden, that's not a behavior, it's a response. And I think getting your team equipped to better understand when you arrive at the door, you might be meeting that person for the first time for them, the 100th time for you, but
Yeah.
leaving space for that, like, really helps people get what needs to get done quicker.
So one of the things I think that's super helpful, and dementia is really hard, right? I mean, you're exactly right. You walk into somebody and you have an expected behavior to something you say, and they behave completely different. I'll give you an example, not a dementia example, but I think it illustrates the point. I was at a doctor's appointment with my wife. She's having a hip replacement. She's been public about it, so I'm okay talking about it. And we were doing a pre-op appointment, and we got there pretty early. And there was another guy sitting there, and he was watching YouTube videos with his sound turned up, no earbuds. It was just really annoying. And so I went over and politely asked him to turn it down, expecting he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry." And instead, he got real nasty about it, right? But in a dementia, you almost have to be prepared for that every day.
Yeah, well, and I think leaving space for feelings, and also recognizing that it's a certain type of person that has the ability. I always say, like, you get the kid gene or the senior gene, you rarely have both. And if you have both, then kudos to you. But if you have people that are great employees, but they can't deal with that population and it's just too much for them, that doesn't make them bad. It may mean that will be better suited somewhere else. But the people that are good, I think sometimes we don't leave space for the emotional toll that takes working with that population every day. So leaving feedback, going back to the manager piece, where people can talk through, today was a hard day, or this made me think of my own experience with this. I think those are the spaces that create employee loyalty that lasts a long time.
Yeah. So I sort of want to do kind of two questions for you. I'm going to give them to you one at a time. When you look at organizations, give me sort of maybe three things, two things, four, five things that make people love their jobs.
So I would say the first thing would be a clear understanding of what is expected of me. People like clarity. They like to know, this is my job. Not that I won't do anything else, but this is what is expected of me every day when I get there. And also a clear understanding of, this is when I work. We hear so often in labor management that, well, I don't know if I work next week or not. The schedule's not published. We found a 70% correlation between showing up to your shift and knowing about it 14 days in advance. If you tell people 2 weeks in advance, they can plan for childcare. They can look at the bus schedule on the Saturday. They can look at whatever they need to arrange in their life to get to work. And people need that, because if I'm not working and I need that to pay my rent, I need to figure out some other way, to get some money to pay my rent. So I think that's two. And number three is, there's a saying that, you want to surround great employees with great employees, making sure that you have a place that people want to come to work because the other people there want to work as well. And it's hard to do. It sounds simple. There's a lot of books about it, but I would say the reason you go into an executive director's office and they have a shelf full of books is because there's no one way to do it. And it's not as easy as the book says, but it's arguably the most important, because if you don't have a good place to work, nothing else really matters.
Yeah. So let's flip the table here for a minute. What are the things that are really terrible? The things that you see that just drive people away. You sort of talk to a story about one, but what are those things that you just kind of go, oh man, I can't believe they did that.
Yeah, I think, I would say there's a couple of things. The big things for me would be not leaving enough space. And I mean, not leaving enough space in that if you have systems and processes and things that are so rigid, that are so locked in there, that you might feel good. And it feels great to, your investors and everyone else to say, like, we've got this locked and loaded in here, but you're not leaving space for the human element of it. And that could be everything from, if you have a great employee that, has tons of experience that's coming in from the outside, and you need to look at the wage scale, having the ability to really look at that and see what makes sense. But also, if you have someone, an example that we just recently had is we look at something called clock creep, which is how far before your shift or after your shift do you work, and what does that add up to at the end of the week. But the first thing we found is there was somebody every day, like she was staying 15 to 17 minutes late. And so the instinct was, I'm going to go find this. I'm going to write her up if she keeps doing it. But instead of going there, with a machete, if you go there with the question and you say, hey, what's going on here? What is this? Come to find out she was staying over because the person that comes after her takes the bus to work, and the bus doesn't arrive until 10 minutes after the shift starts. And she wants to make sure those residents don't have like a lapse between shifts on the floor. And so a rigid organization would say, well, you need to figure out how to get here earlier, or you need to find another job. But instead, this organization, we worked with them, we just slid the shift 15 minutes ahead, and magically everyone's where they're supposed to be when they're supposed to be there. And nobody, the residents are fine, the staff's happy. And that one employee that takes the bus to work feels like we heard them, we saw them. And that's how you get loyalty and longevity.
Well, and the other thing I'm thinking as you're telling this story is that what if you found out that the reason that person was doing that was that it made the difference between paying their bills or not paying their bills, right? I mean, theoretically, in a perfect world, you don't want to have any overtime because it's expensive and all those kinds of things. But in the scope of a building, if you were paying 15 minutes worth of overtime, even if that's, it's really more than just overtime. It's regular time plus overtime, but you transform somebody's lives and they're a great employee. It might be worth it, right?
Yeah, I think it's a balance, right? Because once you open that, you've opened that, and you can't, the question becomes, well, if I need this to pay my bills, then why doesn't this other person deserve it? And then you create, this equity question. And so I think it's about making sure you have the right people scheduled for the right amount of time and helping them understand that, maybe you build some kind of an incentive program for attendance, or you have a resource support for them if they do need extra help in the community, whether it be, with subsidies from utilities or things like that. There's other tools to help people if bills are the problem. But I think that, the I'm going to give you overtime because you deserve it is something that really happens a lot. We once had a scheduler say, I just keep this Post-it note, and these are people that I owe favors to. So when I've got some bonus extra time, I give it to them first. And that's a dangerous place to get. And not because the intent's not the dangerous part. It's the reality is when you get that extra payment, you start living your life to that's what you're going to make. And so all of a sudden, if the rules start being complied to again, you've built a life that requires that extra $40 or $50, and that's a meaningful amount to lose for many of our caregivers.
Yeah, no question about it. So we are just about out of time. I'd like to have you talk for just a minute how you work with companies to help them make their employee experience better.
Sure. So at ProcareHr, we do all things HR for senior living, but specifically in labor management, what we do is we have a three-prong approach. We use a best-in-class scheduling system that allows you to see from clock in, it literally real time comes in and says this person is clocked in at this time, they clocked out at this time. So it matches the schedule with the employee's actual clock in, clock out. We then take that and we've built a set of proprietary analytics on top of it that have 16 indicators of how are we doing? And it's not about how cheap can it be. It's really about how can we leverage the hours and the dollars in the best way possible to get the best result for the residents, but also the financial results there. And we do that through the third prong, which is, I call it personal training for your scheduler. So it really is about making sure if no one's complying with the schedule, why? If we said we're going to do this yesterday, why did we or not do that? So we're able to do a full analysis for anyone in the industry and take a look and see if it's a good fit. And then we can plug in our full suite of services to, get some great results.
Terrific. Matt, thank you very much for joining me. This has been super informative. Anybody who's watching this is going to go off and be a better leader, a better manager. And so I really, really appreciate that. And we will be back with another live stream on Friday. So I hope you join us there.
Thanks, Steve.